Welcome, traveler. Come closer and sit by the scroll. Shoji screens stand still. Footsteps echo faintly from long-forgotten halls. This place is shaped by silence, not absence, but presence without noise. What we open now was never meant to impress, only to be remembered. A tale held in the grain of wood, in the weight of paused breath. Let your shoulders ease, your eyes soften, and your breath settle. We are in Japan during the Edo period, a time when the shoguns reigned and peace was held like porcelain, delicate, disciplined, and always watched. The air in these years was still and formal, like a bow held just a second longer than needed. From the grand estates of daimyo lords to the narrow townhouses of samurai retainers, life moved by quiet rituals and unseen codes. Beneath the seeming stillness was a world layered with duty, precise as brushstrokes on rice paper. Here, in the long hush of night, hierarchy did not sleep. Imagine the household of a mid-ranking samurai, somewhere in the outer quarters of Edo, or perhaps in a rural posting near the rice plains of Tohoku. The air is faint with the scent of burned sandalwood and cooked barley. Outside, the wind toys with bamboo shutters, but within, the home is orderly, framed by polished beams, tatami floors, and fusuma screens that glide like paper spirits through the dark. The day's armor has been set aside. Swords, cleaned and wrapped, rest in careful cradles. In the flickering glow of an oil lamp, bedding is quietly laid across the tatami, not haphazardly, but with precision. Even in sleep, rank matters. Here, the body speaks what the tongue need not. The head of the house, whether a seasoned warrior or a trusted retainer, lies furthest from the door, deep in the room's protective core. His bedding rests against the inner wall, facing no entry, guarded on all sides. Beside him, in descending rank, are those who serve beneath him. Older retainers, younger aides, and sometimes a guest of high esteem. At the edge, near the door, the lowest rank. Sometimes a young page, sometimes a servant born into the house. Their places were not assigned with words. They were known, learned in glances and gestures, passed like tea, silently but without confusion. The order of rest was a reflection of the day's command, and of the household's unspoken code. Who rose first, who stood closest when needed, and who slept nearest to danger, all were inscribed in the placement of the body, a breathing diagram of trust, obligation, and readiness. In this world, sleep was never simply rest. It was posture, it was proof. To lie close to the door was to declare something quietly. I will rise first. I will meet what comes. I will shield what lies behind me. And so, when the lamps were snuffed and the house sank into stillness, the room itself spoke. It said who would rise if danger came. It whispered who bore the weight of the first moment, and who, by duty, would rise last. But even that quiet arrangement held more than symbolism, for the one who slept nearest the door did more than just rest lightly. Some silences are heavy. In the sleeping chambers of Edo period households and dormitories, the night did not simply arrive. It descended. Like a careful hand-folding cloth, it wrapped the room in stillness. Voices were lowered, movements slowed, and when the final lamp was dimmed, a sacred etiquette took hold. This was kaimaku, the unspoken art of nighttime conduct. It began not with instruction, but with atmosphere. The scent of warm rice fading into the tatami, the rustle of garments folded with care, the final clearing of a throat before the silence settled like dust. To live in harmony during waking hours was one thing, but to preserve harmony in sleep, that required deeper restraint. No idle chatter once bedding was laid, no laughter, no whispered stories. Even sighs were softened, held back like breath before prayer. The floor was shared after all, woven straw beneath each sleeper, like threads in a single tapestry. One careless sound could tug loose the whole pattern. Children were taught early. Noise in the dark was not merely rude, it was disorder. A disruption not just of sleep, but of spirit. To stir the air without cause was to disturb the invisible harmony that held the household together. And so each sleeper became a steward of stillness. One turned slowly, the futon barely rustling. Another breathed in quiet cadence, not forcing sleep, but welcoming it as one welcomes snow, gently with patience. The walls, thin as a rice paper, remembered every sound, and so did the elders, whose ears had grown sharper with age. Yet this silence was not cold, it was shared, a kind of mutual reverence, not only for others, but for the invisible order that guided the night. A pact of presence, a ritual of self-restraint. In the dim hours, one might lie awake, eyes open to the ceiling, listening not for sound, but for the absence of it. That delicate balance where stillness becomes its own kind of language, where the nearness of others is felt, not heard. And in that quiet, one often met themselves. The thoughts left unsaid in daylight rose like smoke. Regrets, hopes, prayers never spoken aloud. All of it floated between futons, unspoken yet understood. And so we asked gently, when did silence become so rare? Have we forgotten that not all connection needs words? That sometimes to lie beside another in peace, without noise or need, that is the purest form of respect? In those rooms of straw and soul, silence was not emptiness. It was care, held in every breath. There is a quiet dignity in those who sleep closest to the cold. Not all honor was earned with a blade. Some of it was chosen in silence, in where one placed their mat, in how one waited, and in what they were willing to give up for the sake of another. And so we remember the retainer at the threshold. He was often the youngest or the lowest born among the household, not yet tested in war, not yet entrusted with the affairs of land or ledger. But even so he held a post of great importance, for he slept nearest to the door. A thin reed mat, perhaps, laid just beside the wooden slats, his bedding no thicker than a folded robe. Beyond him, only the sliding doors of paper and pine separated the warmth of the house from the shadows outside. Each night, as the others retired deeper into the estate, he took his place there, between the world and those who belonged to it. He did not complain, for this was duty, and in duty there was honor. The threshold was more than wood and stone. It was a line between chaos and calm, a space where the world could change in a heartbeat. A knock, a cry, the crash of an enemy's footstep, and he was its guardian, not by sword, not yet, but by presence. He listened more than he spoke, the creak of the eaves, the breath of the wind, the rustle of bamboo in the courtyard. He memorized them until even the smallest change struck him like a bell. That was his training, not of sword forms or duels, but of stillness, patience, and silence. Sometimes, when the moonlight poured through the slats and dust floated like pale spirits in the air, he would lie awake and wonder if this too was a kind of battle, a test of endurance, a way of proving loyalty not in blood, but in the unseen moments. in being the first to rise, the last to sleep, and the only one who watched when no one else did. He was part shield, yes, the first the enemy would meet if they came unbidden. But more than that, he was the eyes of the house, the ears of the night, a soul so close to the wind that he could feel a storm before it arrived. And the masters knew this. They did not speak of it often, but sometimes in quiet appreciation, a senior would leave a bowl of warm rice by his place before the sun rose, or a fresh pair of tabi socks at the edge of his mat. No words exchanged, only gestures, the old language of respect. Years might pass like this, seasons folding into one another, the retainer watching the door while the house slept, until one day he too would be called to step inside, to rise from the threshold and take his place further within. But he would never forget where he came from. And even when his bedding grew softer and his post more secure, some part of him would always listen for that creak by the door. For those who begin in silence often carry the deepest strength. And yet one must wonder, what became of those who waited faithfully but were never called deeper in? Who gave their years to a household that never looked back? Were they forgotten? Or did their quiet watching become the very spirit that guarded those walls long after their bodies had faded? These are questions we must carry with care, because the soul of a house does not rest in its banners or swords, but in the silent watcher who slept by the door. Even warriors must sleep. In the drifting hours between dusk and dawn, the camp quieted. Horses snorted faintly in the distance. The last embers of the fire cracked like tired bones, and in the shared tents of the Sengoku fields, men lay side by side, wrapped not just in cloth, but in tension. They called it bed-sharing, but it was more than that. Futons were thin, simple mats, easily rolled and carried. There was no grandeur, no comfort for comfort's sake. Each one held a soldier, his armor stacked neatly beside him, and his sword never more than an arm's reach away. Some kept a hand resting on the hilt even in sleep, not from fear alone, but from habit. A muscle trained to protect, even in dreams. Side by side they lay. Comrades, commanders, sometimes even rivals, bodies aligned in uneasy harmony, breaths rising and falling in a shared rhythm. In the darkness, all ranks disappeared. The general and the foot soldier both faced the same night air, the same ache in their bones, the same doubts whispering at the edges of sleep. And in that closeness, something strange emerged. A bond carved not by celebration, but by quiet survival. You learned the sound of the man next to you, how he breathed when dreaming, how he turned when troubled. You listened for the tremor of nightmares, the soft murmurs of those who spoke in sleep. Not to judge, but to know them, to know who might wake quickly if the alarm sounded, who might freeze, who might run. Trust was not given freely in war. It was earned, not only in the clash of steel, but in the silent hours that followed. When you lay down your sword for a while, but not your caution. When you offered the space beside you to another, and in doing so said, "If I must close my eyes, let it be near someone who will watch the dark with me." And yet, the futon was never just a place of rest. It was a battlefield of the mind. Doubts crept in as the fire dimmed. Will tomorrow be my last sunrise? Will my name be remembered? Or will I vanish like smoke above the grass? Some whispered prayers to the sword before sleep. Others clutched tiny charms from home. a brother's ring, a lock of hair. In these moments, they were not warriors. They were sons, fathers, boys who once played in rivers and now slept beside death. By morning, the futons were folded. The warmth of the body beside you was gone, but something stayed, a shared silence, an unspoken oath, because to sleep near another in war is to reveal the one thing a soldier rarely shows, his vulnerability. And still, we might wonder, what does it mean to rest beside your sword, but never truly rest? And how many warriors woke not to the sound of battle, but to the silence of betrayal? Not all lessons we know were written in ink. So some were learned in silence by the dim glow of the oil lamp, in the warmth of shared sleep, beneath the ever-watchful gaze of the scrolls above. In the Tokugawa era, where order flowed like ink down the brush of Confucian ideals, there were schools not built of stone, but of stillness. Wooden floors creaked gently under bare feet. Scrolls lined the walls. Teachings of the sages brushed in strokes both bold and trembling. And below them, on the straw mats and folded futons, the students lay, not scattered, but side by side. They were boys, mostly, some sons of farmers with ink-stained fingers, others from samurai families, their backs already shaped by expectation. All came seeking knowledge, but before they learned to recite the classics, they learned to sleep. It was not merely rest, it was ritual. At night, the classroom became a dormitory. Scrolls overhead whispered wisdom while the boys arranged their bedding in rows neat as calligraphy. No one received more space than another. The headmaster's eyes, though closed, were always felt. Even in sleep, posture mattered. Breath mattered. This was where humility took root. You did not boast here. You did not seek the warmest corner or pull the quilt tighter for yourself. If a classmate stirred with chills in the night, you shifted your blanket without a word. If one wept quietly into his sleeve, homesick perhaps, or scolded, you did not speak of it come morning. Beneath the scrolls all were equal, equal in learning, equal in longing. Restraint was not taught through punishment, but through closeness. Sharing space with others meant softening your needs. No loud movements, no selfish tossing. Your rest was not your own, it belonged to the room. And yet, within these rows of quiet boys, a brotherhood formed. It was not loud, nor immediate. It came slowly, like ink soaking through paper. You learned who recited passages in their sleep, who twitched with dreams of home, who breathed steadily like a monk, unshaken by exams or dawn drills. By morning, the futons were folded, the scent of straw still clinging to sleeves. Rice gruel steamed in the simple bowls. And the day began not with clamor, but with recitation, voices rising together in practiced harmony. In time, many of these boys would grow into scholars, scribes, or officials. Some would leave the schoolhouse behind, stepping into the wider world with firm speech and disciplined pens. But within them, always, lingered the memory of the quiet nights beneath the scrolls, the cold floor, the shared covers, the unspoken lessons of compassion and self-control. And still, we might ask, in a world that praises achievement, what becomes of the one who listens in silence? Can a scholar's truest wisdom be measured not by what he knows, but by how gently he sleeps beside others? Some nights pass like rivers, quiet, unbroken, carving their way through stone not with force, but with patience. In the age of the Kamakura lords, far from the cities of noise and blade, The Zen monasteries sat still among the pines. Their roofs were low and weathered, their halls lined with shadows and silence. Here time moved differently, not in hours or bells, but in breaths, in bows, in brushstrokes drawn slowly across parchment. And when dusk came, and the temple lamps dimmed to embers, the monks lay down side by side, robes still warm from sitting, minds still echoing the sutras of the day. There were no chambers of rank, no private quarters or chosen comfort, only a single room, lined with tatami, where the monks lay in quiet rows, the space between them measured with deliberate care. This was not merely sleep, it was continuation, another form of meditation, a deep practice in dissolving the self. They did not speak, they did not stir. Even in rest, the discipline held, one breath rising beside another, one body shifting only when necessary so as not to disturb the still water of the room. Their dreams, it was said, carried the scent of ink and pine, not visions of grandeur, but of vast emptiness, of still ponds, of cracked bells, of koans whispered and unresolved. Here, to share a bed was not to grow close in affection, but to shed the illusion of being separate at all. The ego was softened like old paper. Each night was a return, not to comfort, but to the root, to the place before desire, before ambition, where even dreams were watched from a distance, like clouds passing across a wide, still sky. And yet there was tenderness here, not the tender grip of affection, but the open-handed care of those walking the same path. One monk might gently realign another's blanket without waking him. Another might pause his steps in the night, waiting for the breath of the room to settle again. These small gestures, invisible to the world, were part of the way, and in this they found freedom, not in the having, but in the letting go. For to lie beside another without comparison, to share space without needing to be seen, to sleep in the presence of others without fear or pretense. That was a kind of liberation not taught through words, but through nights like these. No ownership, no performance, only presence, only breath. Some truths are not written on parchment or carved in stone. They are walked night after night into the grain of the floorboards. Along the winding roads of the Edo period, where travelers moved like drifting leaves between provinces, there stood the Hatago inns, simple rest stops for the weary. Their lanterns flickered in the dusk like quiet invitations, promising rice, a roof, and a night's reprieve from the wind. Inside, the walls were thin, the tatami well-worn. The air smelled of straw, miso broth, and damp traveling cloaks. But there was order beneath the modesty, a quiet arrangement known best by the innkeeper and rarely spoken aloud. Rooms were not assigned at random. No, they followed a silent map, a map not drawn in ink, but in status. The samurai, proud and upright, were placed deeper within, farthest from the door, where the air was still and the night felt safe. Merchants, despite their coin, slept closer to the edge. Farmers and peddlers, their legs still dusty from the road, unrolled their bedding nearest to the threshold, where the cold crept in first. No one asked why. No one needed to. It was understood, as natural as the rising steam from the evening rice pot. The innkeeper, with eyes sharpened by years, could judge a man's place by the way he removed his sandals, by how he folded his robe, by what he didn't say. And so, without uttering a word, he arranged the sleeping world, a quiet choreography of class, deference, and space. In one room, Perhaps 6 travelers would lie in silence, their bodies separated by a single flickering lamp. The samurai resting with his back to the far wall, hand near his blade. The merchant fingering prayer beads beneath the blanket. The farmer already asleep, breath deep and even, untroubled by politics or pride. Here, in the same space, they shared warmth, but not position. It was a fragile balance, not enforced with rule or chain, but with centuries of custom. Even in dreams, one knew where one belonged. Yet there was grace in it too, the kind of grace that lives in the small gestures. An innkeeper offering the last pickled plum to the lowliest guest, or sliding an extra blanket toward the old man snoring near the door. These things were not written in the guest book, but they mattered. And come morning, as bedding was folded and sandals slipped on, the map vanished once more, like footprints in snow gone with the sun. But the next night, in the next town, it would unfold again, quiet, precise, invisible. And so we might ask, when the floor itself decides your worth, what happens if you choose to lie closer to the cold, not out of obligation, but out of kindness? Can humility redraw the map, even if only for a night? Some silences are heavy, others are soft, like mist curling through reeds, or the hush that settles when all things are exactly where they should be. Silence between straw and soul. In the sleeping chambers of Edo period households and dormitories, the night did not simply arrive, it descended. Like a careful hand folding cloth, it wrapped the room in stillness. Voices were lowered, movements slowed, and when the final lamp was dimmed, a sacred etiquette took hold. This was kaimaku, the unspoken art of nighttime conduct. It began not with instruction, but with atmosphere. The scent of warm rice fading into the tatami, the rustle of garments folded with care, the final clearing of a throat before the silence settled like dust. To live in harmony during waking hours was one thing, but to preserve harmony in sleep, that required deeper restraint. No idle chatter once bedding was laid, no laughter, no whispered stories. Even sighs were softened, held back like breath before prayer. The floor was shared, after all, woven straw beneath each sleeper, like threads in a single tapestry. One careless sound could tug loose the whole pattern. Children were taught early. Noise in the dark was not merely rude. It was disorder, a disruption not just of sleep, but of spirit. To stir the air without cause was to disturb the invisible harmony that held the household together. And so, each sleeper became a steward of stillness. One turned slowly, the futon barely rustling. Another breathed in quiet cadence, not forcing sleep, but welcoming it as one welcomes snow, gently, with patience. The walls, thin as rice paper, remembered every sound, and so did the elders, whose ears had grown sharper with age. Yet this silence was not cold, it was shared, a kind of mutual reverence, not only for others, but for the invisible order that guided the night. A pact of presence, a ritual of self-restraint. In the dim hours, one might lie awake, eyes open to the ceiling, listening not for sound, but for the absence of it. That delicate balance where stillness becomes its own kind of language, where the nearness of others is felt, not heard. And in that quiet, one often met themselves. The thoughts left unsaid in daylight rose like smoke. Regrets, hopes, prayers never spoken aloud. All of it floated between futons, unspoken yet understood. And so we ask, gently, when did silence become so rare? Have we forgotten that not all connection needs words? that sometimes to lie beside another in peace, without noise or need, that is the purest form of respect? In those rooms of straw and soul, silence was not emptiness. Even in hardship, the human spirit weaves its own kind of grace. Not loud, not noble, but quiet, woven into gestures so small they're often missed by history. In the low huts of the Muromachi countryside, where smoke curled through holes in the thatch and the earth floor stayed cool year-round, rest was neither private nor soft. Families slept shoulder to shoulder, children pressed into mothers, elders curled near the hearth, all wrapped beneath a single patched quilt. There was no ceremony, no scrolls on the walls, no quiet codes of class. Only necessity. The cold did not care for poetry, and hunger made no room for pride. But even there, in the humblest homes, rituals remained. Simple ones, human ones. The quilt, often worn to threads, was folded with care. Each patch told a story, an old robe from a grandfather, a faded sash from a wedding long past, a child's kimono too small to wear, but too precious to discard. In the dark, you did not see these things, but you felt them. The memory held in cotton. The warmth passed from hand to hand. There were no separate beds, no assigned places, yet order still settled in its own way. The elders lay nearest the fire, their bones needing the warmth. Infants nestled between bodies. The young men often at the edges, closest to the draft, grumbling but never moving. Because even then, they knew the unspoken rule. Comfort flowed inward, not outward. Before sleep, there were murmured chants. Not every night, but often enough. A quick thanks for the rice, however meager. A wish that the frost stay off the beans. Words spoken softly, half for the gods, half for themselves. And then, stillness, not perfect. A cough, a creak, a baby stirring. But mostly a collective sigh, the kind only found when many lives exhale at once. In that shared warmth, bonds were forged that no scroll could capture. A sibling shifting slightly to give space. A child reaching out in the night and finding a mother's hand. No doctrine taught them this. Only the rhythm of living side by side. The world outside might have been divided, lords and peasants, war and peace, land and tax. But beneath the quilt, there was only one world, the world of survival, of closeness, of breath and body, and the small grace of another person's warmth. To sleep alone in grand beds while forgetting the quiet trust that once lived in the press of another's shoulder. The peasants of that time had little, but they slept together, and in that closeness found something we often miss, the sacredness of the ordinary. Memory does not live in words alone. It lingers in scent, in texture, in the hush that settles just before dreams arrive. Before sleep ever took the body, the room itself began to speak. It spoke in the scent of tatami, fresh in spring, when the mats were newly woven, still green with the sweetness of straw. In older rooms, it was deeper, muskier, a scent layered with years of footsteps, of seasons passed in silence. The floor held stories. You could not read them, but you could feel them, just beneath your feet, or later, beneath your back, as you lay still, the way a tree might remember the wind in its rings. Then there was the ash. Each evening, before the house quieted, firewood cracked in the brazier. Pine, sometimes, if it could be spared. Cypress, if luck allowed. The smoke rose soft and slow, curling through beams, touching walls that had seen generations sleep. By the time the coals dimmed, the air had changed. No longer the open scent of the outdoors, but a closed-in warmth. Charred wood, worn cotton. A faint trace of miso and rice that had long since cooled. It was not perfumed, it was not clean by modern taste, but it was honest. It was the scent of life as it was, and always incense. A single stick, perhaps, lit in the corner by the eldest in the room. Sandalwood, or in rare homes, aloes wood, dark, sweet, grounding. It burned slowly as the night deepened, a fragrant thread connecting waking to sleep, body to spirit. To lie in that air was to be wrapped not only in cloth, but in time. These scents shaped the dreams. They settled in the folds of the mind, softened thought, calmed restless breath. They reminded the sleeper where they were, and more importantly, who they were. A son of this house, a child of this land, a vessel of lineage, scent, and silence. For in the stillness of the chamber, with the fire hushed and the last echo of footsteps gone, the room became a world of its own, walled not by timber, but by sensation, by the soft prickle of straw beneath the quilt, by the distant murmur of wind against paper screens, by the scent of ash that said, "You are safe, you are home, now rest." And so we are left with a question, faint as incense trailing in the dark. When we forget the sense of our sleep, do we forget part of ourselves? What becomes of dreams when the air no longer reminds us who we are? Not all who share your bed walk in with footsteps. Some arrive in silence, drawn not by invitation, but by presence. The ghost beside you. In the long nights of the Edo-era, when the wind sighed through the shoji and the hearth dimmed to an orange glow, sleep was never taken lightly. For though bodies lay side by side beneath a single quilt, not every presence in the room was of flesh and breath. It was said, quietly and mostly by elders, that spirits drifted toward warmth. That where breath gathered, so too did echoes. A child's fevered dream, a widow's sleepless grief, a warrior's restless guilt. These were not things easily contained, and when shared sleep became routine, so too did the visits of the unseen. They called them maribito, not always malevolent, but never quite welcome. A cold weight at the edge of the mat, a pressure near the chest, too heavy for air alone. The sense that someone had entered after the last lamp was snuffed out. And so, people prepared. Not loudly, not with fear, but with quiet care. Salt, the old protector, was placed near the head. A small dish of it, coarse and white. Not to season food, but to purify space. Its presence told the spirits, you are seen, but you may not cross. Others placed folded paper charms beneath the futon, or strands of rice straw twined in knots and hung by the window. Not all believed, but few risked sleeping unguarded. Better to be respectful, just in case. Parents taught children to tuck their feet in, so no spirit could tug them toward the edge. Lovers whispered each other's names before sleep, to anchor one another in the waking world. And the sick were rarely left alone at night, for it was believed that spirits most often came for those already halfway gone. Yet it wasn't only fear that shaped these customs. It was awareness, a recognition that rest is a threshold, not just between day and night, but between realms. That when we lie down and close our eyes, we do not always know who or what is lying beside us. And so rituals bloomed in the quiet, a single clap before bed, a prayer whispered into the blanket, a moment of stillness asking the night to be kind. Most slept soundly, but not all. Sometimes, in the hush before dawn, one would wake with a shiver, No sound, no movement, just a presence that lingered like breath on the neck. A dream too heavy, a feeling too sharp, and nothing to explain it but the stories they were told, and the salt untouched by the bedside. And so we ask, not with fear, but with wonder, what unseen guests do we carry into sleep? And in a world that's forgotten its rituals, who watches while we dream? Even in sleep, a warrior was never alone, for the ancestors watched, not with judgment, but with quiet, unwavering presence. To sleep with the sword facing east. Among the samurai of old, rest was never taken without ritual. The body might lie still, but the discipline of the day flowed into the night, like ink bleeding into silk. There was a right way to close the eyes, a right way to breathe, and above all, a right way to place the sword. It was said the blade must face east, not by chance, not by habit, but by reverence. East was the direction of the rising sun, the path of Amaterasu, the goddess of light. To point your sword eastward was to align with life, with clarity, with renewal. To point it west, the land of the dead, was to invite misfortune, or worse, to dishonor the line from which you came. And so, before bedding was unrolled, the katana was placed with care, edge outward, handle inward, direction aligned. The act was silent, simple, sacred. The body too followed rules. One did not lie flat like the dead, nor curl into the shape of a child. Instead, one rested on the side, back straight, hands folded, ready to rise should the night bring unrest. Even dreams were considered messages. If a warrior stirred too often or muttered words unknowable, it was not brushed off. It was remembered, shared in hushed tones over morning tea. For dreams were not private in the way we now believe. They were omens, whispers from those who came before. Some kept ancestral tablets near the bed. Others burned a thin stick of incense before sleep, letting its rising smoke drift toward unseen eyes, a sign that the heart was clean, the sword was pure, and the spirit unshaken. For the samurai did not believe rest to be weakness, but they did believe it must be earned and guarded, not only from the world outside, but from the chaos within. To sleep carelessly was to forget who you served. To toss and turn was to show disorder in the soul. And so each night they practiced peace the way they practiced war, with form, with intention, with unwavering quiet. The room, humble as it might be, became a temple of presence. The sword, though untouched, became a prayer, and the warrior, wrapped in the cotton and silence, became once more a child of the lineage, watched by those who had wielded blades before him, now silent, now waiting. Not all warmth is given. Some must be earned over time, like a tree learning to bend with the wind. The child closest to the cold. In the quiet rooms of the old households, beneath roofs patched with care and flaws, swept smooth by habit, night came not with solitude, but with shared breath, shared quilts, shared space. And yet, always there was a pattern. At the center lay the parents, sometimes the grandparents too, the hearth of the family, its warm and beating heart. And at the edges, small figures curled into themselves, toes tucked in, noses red from the breeze that slipped through paper screens. This was where the children slept, not because they were unloved, but because this was how one learned to grow. To lie nearest the cold was a right, unspoken but understood. A lesson taught not through words, but through wind. A whisper that said, "You are part of this home, but not yet its keeper." One day you must be strong enough to take the center, but first you must learn the edge. The cold was a teacher. It nudged the child to curl tighter, to rise earlier, to find stillness in discomfort. And the child, without knowing, was shaped by it. They learned not to cry out unless truly needed. They learned to pull the quilt up slowly so as not to disturb the warm world behind them. They learned to listen to the breathing of their mother, to the stirring of their father, to the rhythm of life lived in closeness. And in that distance from the hearth, they dreamed, not of fire, but of someday becoming it, of being the one others gathered near, of one day letting their child sleep where they had once lain, closest to the breeze, farthest from the flame. There were nights, of course, when the wind was too sharp or the fever too high. And in those moments, a mother's hand would reach out in the dark, drawing the child inward, closer to the warmth. A rare gift, not withheld, but saved for when it truly mattered. Because to give warmth too freely was to weaken the flame. To teach resilience was to trust the child's becoming. And so, year after year, body grew, spirit deepened, and the sleeping spot inched inward. Until one day, the edge was no longer theirs, and they, now older, would feel a small hand brush against them in the night, cold, seeking, familiar. And they would smile in the dark and shift the quilt. And so we ask gently, what if love is not always comfort, but the quiet faith that you can survive the cold, and still offer warmth to others when your time comes? Some dreams are not born from the mind, but from what hangs above it, quiet images brushing against the soul like wind through silk. Dreams under the scroll of heaven. In the sleeping chambers of the old houses, where the lamp's flame flickered like a slow heartbeat, and the futons rested in rows upon polished straw, there was always one object that watched over the sleepers in silence, a single hanging scroll, simple and yet profound, chosen not for decoration, but for alignment, a mirror of the season, a whisper to the heart, a soft invitation to dream in rhythm with the world. In spring, the scroll might show a single cherry blossom, suspended mid-fall, not bright, but gentle, its descent reminding all who lay beneath it that beauty fades not to sadden, but to teach gratitude. In summer, a bodhisattva might appear, seated in stillness, eyes half lowered in eternal compassion. His presence calmed the room like deep water, guiding even the restless into quieter sleep. In autumn, it was the leaf, dry, golden, curling on the branch, or already fallen, a symbol of change, of letting go, of preparing to rest more deeply. And in winter, sometimes nothing at all, just a pale mountain wrapped in mist, the silence between breaths, a painting of absence that said more than presence ever could. These scrolls were not always grand. The ink might be faded, the paper creased, but to those who lay beneath them, they were the sealing of the spirit, the last thing the eyes touched before closing. They shaped the dreams, not with narrative, but with feeling, the way a soft bell shapes silence, the way incense leaves behind a presence long after it's gone. Children would stare at them until sleep pulled them under, wondering if the bodhisattva moved when the room grew still, or if the leaf in the painting would finally drift to the bottom of the scroll by dawn. Elders, before resting their heads, might bow once, not deeply, not performatively, but in recognition. That above their slumber hung something wiser, older, quieter than even they. To sleep beneath a scroll was to surrender not only the body, but the heart, to let something greater frame the night, to say, without speaking, "Guide me gently wherever this dream may go." And so, we wonder, what do we hang above our rest today? And if we replaced our screens, our noise, our endless light, with a single image that carried meaning, would our dreams remember how to listen again? Would we? There are bonds that need no words, only breath and the closeness of those who have chosen to rest, not as strangers, but as keepers of the same silence. The breath between us was the bond. In the final stillness of night, when the lamps had long since gone dark and the floor had grown cool beneath woven mats, what remained was not the body's weight, nor even the shape of the room, but the breath. Software measured, shared. One inhale rising beside another, one exhale melting into the quiet air. A rhythm more ancient than speech, older than war or scripture. This was the final teaching of Kaimaku, not of etiquette alone, but of presence. It did not matter who you were in the light, samurai, monk, farmer, child. Beneath one roof, in one room, you slept in unison, not perfectly, but faithfully, each person surrendering to rest without needing to be first, or loud or separate. The quiet, like a woven net, caught them all. In this space, small gestures became sacred. A blanket pulled silently over another's shoulder, a shift in posture to give just 1 inch more warmth, a breath held so as not to disturb the deep sleep of the elder beside you. No one taught these things aloud. They were learned the way rain teaches earth, over time and without hurry. And beneath it all, there lived something deeper still, the memory of ancestors, of those who had once slept in these same rooms, whose bones now rested in the hills, whose breath had once mingled with the same night air. To share a sleeping space was to step into their memory. To lie quietly was not just politeness, it was reverence. Reverence for lineage, for life, for the understanding that to rest near another without fear, without performance, was to say, "I trust you, I am here with you." Let the world fade together for just one night. And so, night after night, generation after generation, the houses held this rhythm, invisible, unspoken, yet deeply known. A child would grow, slowly moving from the cold edge to the warmer middle. A parent would age, drifting toward the perimeter once more. And all the while, the breath continued, steady, joined, eternal. And when dawn came, as it always did, the futons were folded, the scrolls once more looked upon, the salt gathered from the bedside. But the silence remained, carried in the bodies that had learned to rest not alone, but together. And so we ask, in a time of doors and walls and quiet isolation, what would it mean to measure closeness not by words or gifts, but by how well we listen to another's breath in the dark? And if we shared sleep again with care, would we remember what it truly means to belong? Some nights are not meant to be shut away. They ask to be witnessed, not with speech, but with stillness. The mat beneath the moon gate. When the heat of summer clung to the walls like a second skin, when even the floor seemed to hum with the memory of sun, some elders would slide open the shoji and carry their mat to the edge of the house, just before the garden, where the wooden walkway met the world beyond. They did not do this for breeze alone. They came to sleep beneath the moon. Not fully outside, not fully in, just there, in that threshold space where crickets whispered and the garden breathed. The night air cooled the skin. The scent of damp earth rose from moss and stone. And above, a pale moon drifted through the bamboo slats as if keeping watch. No walls, no words, only presence. Their bedding was simple: a folded futon, a light cover, a small pillow, perhaps filled with buckwheat husks. Nearby, a lacquered tray with water, a towel, maybe a single stick of unlit incense. These were not the needs of the body, but of the spirit, a ritual of placement, of attention. And when they lay down, they did not close their eyes immediately. They watched the slow movement of shadows across gravel, the sway of maple leaves in the dark, the soft flicker of fireflies rising like embers from unseen hands. They listened to the creak of bamboo fencing, the distant splash of a carp in the pond, the rhythmic song of crickets rising and falling like the breathing of the land itself. There was a kind of communion here, a quiet understanding between human and world, not one of control, but of surrender, of remembering that long before we built houses and walls, we belonged to nights like these. The elders' breath slowed. Their eyes, though heavy, remained half open for a while, as if they didn't want to miss even a single movement of the moon across the sky. And when sleep finally came, it came not as escape, but as arrival, into the arms of something older, deeper, vast as silence. No one disturbed them. Children passing by hushed their steps. Younger family members placed a folding screen nearby, more out of ritual than protection. For all understood, this was not just rest, it was remembrance. A return to the time before words, when to lie beneath the stars was enough. Discipline did not end with the setting sun. It merely changed form, from voice to silence, from action to stillness. When the drumbeat stilled. In the stone-walled barracks of great castles, long after the courtyard had emptied and the torches had softened to orange coals, there came a final sound. Low, steady, absolute. The taiko, the night drum, it rolled once, twice, then fell silent. And with that, so did everything else. The final drumbeat was more than signal, it was a threshold. From that moment on, the day was over, and yet the warrior remained a warrior. Rows of soldiers, laid in formation even as they slept. No one chose their own spot. Position was determined by rank, by trust, by the chain of command etched into the very grain of the tatami beneath them. And though their weapons were set aside, nothing was truly out of reach. Even sleep followed order. A turn of the body was never careless, it was measured. To shift too loudly, too often, marked a restless spirit. To rise without need was to disturb the peace, to break the silent oath of those around you. Some slept on their side, facing the same direction as their superior. A silent nod of alignment. Others, closer to the wall, kept one ear turned toward the courtyard, just in case the rhythm of the night shifted. Blankets were shared, but folded with care. Sandals placed just so. The scent of steel still lingered in the air, not sharp, but steady, as if reminding all present that even dreams must answer to discipline. No idle talk, no fire beyond what the god permitted. The hum of breath and the creak of floorboards were the only sounds permitted, and even they seemed to carry meaning. A man's ability to sleep calmly was watched, not for comfort's sake, but for readiness. Who would wake at the first alarm? Who would freeze? Who would reach for the sword before their eyes were fully open? These were questions answered in silence night after night, and still, beneath the structure, there was something deeper, a sense of unity, dozens of men breathing as one, resting not in luxury, but in shared duty, each one trusting that the man beside him would not falter in the dark. There are places in a house that hold more than warmth. They carry memory and meaning and a silence so deep it feels like breath held in stone. At the far end of such a space, beyond the threshold and the layers of lacquered screens, there lay the most guarded figure of them all, the patriarch, a pillow for the patriarch. Within the protected heart of the room, his bedding was the softest. The floor beneath him was raised slightly, polished smooth with years of reverence. His quilt, embroidered with crest and season, folded not only over his limbs, but over the weight of his years, his rank, his burdens. He did not lie closest to the wind, he slept farthest from it, for he was the fire at the center, and the house was built around his stillness. To the young, he might have seemed unreachable, a distant presence like the moon glimpsed behind paper walls. But within that quiet frame lay more than age. It held the long ache of decisions made, of oaths kept, of names remembered and names forgotten. His pillow was not just for the head, it cradled memory, the echo of voices long gone, the taste of wartime millet, the scent of his father's robes and his father's father before that. Every fiber of that resting place was layered with tradition, not as burden, but as bone. And around him, the air was different, thicker perhaps, slower, as if time itself bowed its head when entering. No door was ever slid too quickly in that room. No sandal scuffed the floor without regret. Even silence walked with care where he slept. In winter, warm stones were wrapped in cloth and placed near his bedding before dusk. In summer, cool water steamed in basins outside the walls, their scent of pine and plum meant to carry calm through the space. The room breathed with him. He did not speak often, but when he did, his words did not rise like flames. They settled like falling ash, final, still glowing. His body, though older now, still held the shape of command, the spine worn but unbending, the hands slower but deliberate. And in sleep, one could see the peace he rarely wore during the day, the face of a man who bore much and had learned not to show it. But here is what we must remember. This place of safety, this deep-rooted comfort, was not built by comfort alone. It was shaped by countless sacrifices, by servants who rose before dawn, by sons who never returned from the campaign road, by wives who kept the incense lit even in grief. It was all of them, the seen and the unseen, who wrapped the patriarch in his blanket of stillness. And one day, as all things must pass, his mat would be empty. The pillow would rest untouched. The room would seem larger, colder, quieter, and a new head would be chosen. But the warmth left behind? That lingered. In the walls, in the hush of footfalls outside, in the way others still lowered their voices when passing by, even long after he had gone. Because the center of a house is not merely where its walls meet. It is where memory sleeps, undisturbed. And yet, we might ask, what happens when the patriarch does not lead with wisdom, but with fear? When his rest is guarded, but his people remain restless? Does tradition protect or imprison? These are questions not easily laid to rest, not even with the softest pillow. And so, the ancestor slept first, before any mat touched floor, before the quilt was unfolded or the room grew quiet. A single thread of incense rose toward the rafters, thin as breath, slow as memory. In that sacred hush, no voice dared rise. Only hands moved, palms pressed together, a bow given not to stone or statue, but to the invisible weight above, to those whose names were once spoken aloud and now only murmured at dusk. The altar received the prayer, and only then, only after, did the living prepare to rest. Beneath that blessing, within that shadow, not from fear, but from reverence. The old ones taught that sleep was not safety unless the dead were first at peace, that we do not lie down alone, not truly. Behind each breath is another, long vanished, but still present in the hush of the room, in the smoke, in the rhythm of night. To rest with honor is to remember. To sleep with dignity is to leave space for those who no longer rise. So let us draw inward now, gently. The scroll is closing. The final ink has dried. The fire beneath the kettle is down to embers, and the walls, once flickering with shadow play, are still. But this is not an end. It is the bow at the end of a verse, a silence that holds the weight of all that was said. You have heard many beds laid tonight, many breaths drawn and given, from warrior to monk, child to peasant, patriarch to the unnamed soul at the door, each one different, and yet the same, all slept with care, because how one sleeps reveals how one lives, and how one lives is what one leaves behind. There is a dignity in the quiet gesture, a kind of fire in restraint, not the fire that devours, but the one that warms, steady, glowing, needing little, offering much. To fold a quilt without being asked, to sleep near the cold so another may be warm, to rest beside your blade, not for fear, but because you remember who you are. These are not small things. They are the marrow of tradition, the breath between generations, the silence that holds more truth than 1,000 spoken words. So when you next lie down, let it be not only for the body, let it be for those who came before. Let it be with the calm of the pine, the stillness of snow, the strength of stone. Let your breath join theirs, just for a moment, and let that be enough. The ancestor slept first. Now it is your turn. The scroll closes now, its edges worn but its voice unshaken. Though the ink fades, what it carried lingers, not in words alone, but in the quiet between them. Tonight's story was never meant to teach, only to remind and to return. So let it echo softly long after this moment has passed. Rest easy now, traveler. The past will keep watch, and the silence will do the rest.